You know, it's pretty wild how sometimes a single month can just completely reset the political game. In this explainer, we're going to break down how the events of November 2025 sent an absolute shockwave through the U.S. political system, all the way from state elections to the halls of Washington.
So that leads to the big question, right? How can a handful of state and local elections really cause such a massive national tremor? Well, this month proved they absolutely can. They were the catalyst for a whole series of events that would end up redefining the road to the 2026 midterms.
Okay, so it all kicked off with the first domino to fall on November 4th, a series of off-year elections that everyone was watching closely. Now, on the surface, they might just look like your standard local contests, but trust me, they were the first tremors of a major shift in the national political mood.
So when you look at the results, you start to see a really clear pattern. In Virginia, Abigail Spanberger made history, becoming the state's first ever woman governor. Over in New Jersey, Democrats held on to a key governorship with Mikey Sherrill. And then, in New York City, Zohran Mamdani's win was a huge victory for progressives, signaling a pretty big shift in America's largest city.
So, what happens when you put all these pieces together? Well, you get a pretty clear picture of voters in some really important states pushing for a change in direction. For Democrats, this was a huge moment of validation, and for Republicans, it immediately kicked off some urgent questions about their whole strategy and messaging heading into the next election cycle.
And believe me, that shockwave, it didn't take long at all to reach Washington, D.C. The ripples from these state elections started putting immediate pressure on a federal government that was, let's just say, already pretty on edge.
And you've got to remember, the White House was already in a super tough spot, still trying to manage the fallout from a recent government shutdown. So these election results, they basically landed like a warning shot, adding a whole new layer of political pressure to an already tense situation.
So how did the administration respond? With a really clear three-point plan. First, stabilize government operations. Get things running smoothly. Second, manage the public narrative, control the story. And third, get ready for a new and probably intense round of budget negotiations. This was all about projecting control and trying to get back on the front foot.
And at the same time, over on Capitol Hill, oh yeah, the messaging wars absolutely ignited. Both parties just scrambled to spin the election outcomes as this big public endorsement of their own agendas. For Democrats in Congress, these state-level wins were a serious morale and momentum boost, and it really ramped up the pressure to get those budget talks back on track, and whatever they do, avoid another costly shutdown.
But here's the thing, this story isn't just about Washington. The ripple effect kept spreading, hitting the judicial branch and sparking some really significant political moves at the state level. It just goes to show how widespread these changes really were.
Okay, so before we jump into this huge court ruling from the month, we need to get on the same page with a key term you see right here, special prosecutor. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Just think of it as an independent lawyer brought in from the outside to handle a really sensitive investigation, specifically to avoid any hint of a conflict of interest.
All right, with that in mind, let's look at what happened in the James Comey case. A federal judge actually dismissed several indictments against the former FBI director. But, and this is the really critical part, the ruling had nothing to do with whether he was guilty or innocent. It was based entirely on technical problems with how that special prosecutor was appointed in the first place.
And you can probably guess what happened next, right? The reaction was immediate and completely split down the middle. Comey supporters were calling it a total vindication. His critics, on the other hand, were blasting it as partisan justice, basically arguing the system was being manipulated for political reasons. It just poured more fuel on the fire of the country's political divisions.
And while all this was happening in the courts, voters were making some big moves themselves. Over in California, voters gave the green light to Proposition 50. Now, this might sound like just some local issue, but think about it. Creating a brand new congressional map in the nation's most populous state? Well, that has enormous consequences for the balance of power in the U.S. House come 2026.
Okay, so let's take a breath. After a month packed with election upsets, White House pivots, congressional battles, and landmark court rulings, what does it all actually mean? Let's try to connect the dots and see what this all sets up for the 2026 midterms.
When you boil it all down, four really clear trends seem to pop out from all the chaos of November. 1. Democrats came out of the month feeling energized. 2. Republicans are now staring down a necessary strategic recalibration. They've got to rethink things. 3. State-level politics are clearly getting way more influential on the national stage. And 4. Get ready for more high-profile legal fights. because they are set to remain a huge part of the news cycle.
You know, there's a quote from the source analysis that just nails the impact of this month perfectly. We don't always see state and local elections shift the mood of national politics so quickly, but this November we clearly did. It really drives home just how unusual and important this whole period was.
And all of this leaves us with the million-dollar question as we look ahead. Was this political shockwave of November 2025 a real preview of what's coming in the 2026 midterms? Is this setting the stage for a major political realignment? Or was it all just a temporary shift, a fleeting moment in a constantly changing landscape? The answer to that is probably going to define American politics for the next 2 years.